A death along Interstate 29 is being investigated by South Dakota's Department of Criminal Investigation.
It happened 12 miles south of Beersford and involved a semi-truck. KELOLAND News had a crew on the scene for several hours this afternoon. Traffic was reduced to one lane in the area until the scene was cleared. We'll bring you more details on KELOLAND News and KELOLAND.com as soon as they are available.
A 23-year-old Wilma Nissen's life was as troubling as her death. Nissen was the Jane Doe found murdered in a ditch in northwest Iowa in 1978.
Nissen, who had been working as an escort and dancer out of Sioux Falls, wasn't identified until nearly 30 years after she was killed. As the years pass, now adding up to 43, the case gets colder.
But as we see in tonight's KELOLAND News investigation, Angela Kennecke found out that cracking this case could hinge on technology that isn't yet available here.
Not much happens along these rural roads in Lyon County, Iowa. But in 1978, the entire community was in for a shock.
Somebody was walking the ditches. They were burying cable or gonna bury cable. And he came across the body just to the west of us here in the ditch.
Wilma's body was discovered by the worker just about 20 inches from the gravel road, but it was hidden by high weeds that weren't mowed at the time, allowing her body to be undiscovered for several months. The worker, Steve Husong, was just 19 on October 4th, 1978. He talked to KELOLAND News about his grisly discovery in 2006.
First thing I thought was a mannequin. I really thought it was just a mannequin laying in the ditch. And then I got a little closer and realized that it was an actual body.
Badly decomposed. She had white leather boots on and her feet were tied together.
Retired Lyon County Sheriff's Office Detective Jerry Berkey worked the case for nearly a decade.
To have a Jane Doe found in the middle of nowhere that's not from around here, where do you even start?
Finally, in 2006, a lab technician matched her left thumbprint and a print card from the Los Angeles Police Department, where Wilma Nissen had been arrested for prostitution. With Jane Doe identified, the real work to catch her killer could begin.
They lost all those years of finding her family members, finding people that knew her. You know, I traveled extensively working on this case, and we'd find people 6 months after they died.
She was a prostitute. I think she did it to get by. She was in the system, and you know, I think she was married a bunch of times, and I think she was just trying to get the love she never got growing up.
By the age of 23, Wilma had also given birth 3 times. Her children were all placed in foster care.
I was always told that she just kind of left the hospital when I was born.
Chrissy Atkinson was adopted by her mother's foster parents. She later learned that her biological mother had been severely neglected and locked in a closet as a child, and eventually removed from her California home.
She was basically wild when they got her. She'd never been to school. She couldn't read or write. She couldn't eat with a fork. She was, I think, 10 years old.
At the age of 17, Atkinson began looking for her biological parents. But it wasn't until 2006 that she got an answer about what happened to her mother.
The same friend's mom that found my biological dad actually showed up at my house with a newspaper article that they'd identified through fingerprints that they'd identified my biological mom.
To hear that your biological mother had been murdered.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was a shock. It answered a lot of questions on where was she, why couldn't I find her, why did I never hear from her, and brought up a whole bunch of new ones.
The biggest new question, who murdered Wilma Nissen?
We have our ideas who's responsible, but proving that is going to be impossible.
Impossible why?
We don't have the evidence.
In 2007, the Lyon County Sheriff released a photo of this woman connected to the case. She went by the name of Sugar. Investigators say Sugar and another dancer known as Peaches robbed other dancers. While Peaches has never been identified, they do know who Sugar is.
Yes, we have spoken with Sugar several times.
You've spoken with her?
Yeah.
What came out of that?
Denials.
Do you believe she killed Wilma?
I don't know who I believe killed Wilma, but I do know there's several people that know who killed Wilma. or that were there and saw Wilma get killed. Now, whether she did it or not, I don't know. Whether she knows about it, I do believe she knows about it.
Detective Berkey says one suspect failed a lie detector test 3 separate times. However, that wasn't enough to press charges. This man, John Van Gameren, now 94 years old, was arrested in August of 2009 and charged with 6 counts of perjury for lying to investigators about transporting strippers and prostitutes from Sioux Falls to his Northwest Iowa home. Those charges were later dismissed.
Initially, he actually told us about the parties, and then he started denying the parties even.
And did you ever get any good answers from him?
No.
Van Gemeren is not a suspect in Wilma's murder. A serial killer known as the Truck Stop Killer once was. Lyon County received federal funds to investigate whether Robert Ben Rhodes murdered Wilma. Rhodes had been living in Sioux Falls in 1978. Berkey interviewed Rhodes in the Joliet, Illinois prison.
We more or less ruled him out. He hadn't started, well, he called it stealing hubcaps until after that time.
In 2007, Wilma Nissen's body was exhumed in hopes of extracting new DNA evidence. Unfortunately, time and water washed that hope away. However, investigators were able to determine her cause of death, but have never made it public.
Because we got to hold on to something in case we do come across the suspect that did it. You know, a lot of this is out in the public, and people know, but that's one thing nobody knows.
Except for you. Yeah. There's one other piece of evidence that investigators are holding on to, just waiting for technology to catch up. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office hired a Scandinavian-based company using a new technique.
And we hired them to go through our evidence, i.e. the rope or clothing, and try to come up with as much DNA as they could. And they could find DNA, but they had to amplify it.
The FBI's criminal DNA databases, or CODIS, currently don't support amplified DNA, so that evidence hasn't been of any use. However, eventually it could lead to her killer.
With the amplified DNA, they were actually able to rule myself out because I had handled the evidence. The previous sheriff, I know we made sure his DNA wasn't contaminated on the evidence. Actually, I think the previous 2 sheriffs, we had them test to make sure it wasn't contaminated evidence.
So is there one person's DNA or more than one person's DNA?
There was more than one person's DNA.
Discovering the identity of her mother's killer or killers has now become a mission for Atkeson.
You know, the more people that hear her story, the more likely it is. They're so close, it feels like they're so close. So just one little thing could solve this. So the more people that hear it, the better the odds. She deserves to have justice. She deserves to, you know, whoever did this to her deserves to face justice.
While Wilma Nissen's remains were exhumed in 2007, the Lyon County Sheriff's Office has not reburied them. They say they're holding on to them in case new technology develops that could help yield more clues in the cold case.
Now, all this month,